Welcome, everyone, to the MMA Happy Hour podcast. I am Kyle Anthony, your host for today. We are talking UFC 320, headlined by Magomedov and Alex Pereira. We're going to be breaking down 4 plays here on the show today. Now, listen, we are coming off a nice, profitable evening at UFC Perth last weekend. 4-1 on client plays. Did hit on our best bet, picked up 6 units, and let's just roll that momentum right into this stacked card that we do have this Saturday. And if you want to become a client, link down in the description. Already have 2 plays locked in. I do have a max bet already, so check that out if you want to become a client. And with that being said, let's dive into the main event of the evening between Magomedov and Alex Pereira. Now, we've got Ankalaev sitting around minus 285. And the comeback here, we've got Pereira at plus 230. Now, this is a rematch from their fight back in March, in a fight where, I got to say, Magomed really did his thing, was able to go out there, was able to move forward, and what was able to do was pressure Pereira, push him up against the fence when he needed to, outbox him when they were in close, kind of matched some of the things that Pereira does well in the kicking arsenal of things, and just really mix it up very well. It was able to win the decision 48-47, 48-47, and 49-46 on the judges' scorecard. He gets his hand raised. We see the rematch this Saturday. Now, before I dive into that part of it, you could take this with a grain of salt or put on your tinfoil hat or whatever you want to do. But when I was watching that first fight, I got to say, I thought right out the gate, Pereira looked bad. He looked terrible. I thought he wasn't doing a lot of things that we've seen him normally do. And, you could say, hey, it's credit to the wrestling threat of Ankalaev. It could be credit. Obviously, it's credit to Ankalaev, but also the fact that, there are reports that Pereira was injured going into that fight. Now, we're all hearing now that Pereira is saying he was 40% going into that fight. And some people are kind of, hey, hey, he's just saying that or whatever it is. I don't really put Pereira as a guy that's really going to put out excuses. He's a guy that steps in on short notice, doesn't really care who he's fighting. And not only that, but there is confirmed reports from Joe Rogan. This is something you can look up. Now, again, take it with a grain of salt, tinfoil hat, whatever you want to do. But Joe Rogan came out and said he confirmed Pereira had a broken hand going into that fight. He said outright, I've spoken to people. That's what's happened. Even, you've heard Pereira talk about it, not really say what the injury was, say he had health concerns. So there is that part of it here that you've got to put into this, that maybe he wasn't 100%, and also you got to look at the fact that, out of the 5 rounds, Pereira landed 11 head strikes. 11. He was spamming the leg kicks like crazy. It looked like he didn't want to throw that hand. Even during exchanges, it looked like he didn't really want to, let his hands go at any point. It's his best weapon, the left hand. He hardly threw it in 5 rounds. There's definitely something to that. Now, how you quantify it going into this fight, how do you look at it going into this fight, but I think there's definitely something to be said about that part of it. Now, stylistically going into this fight here, the big path here that I think that some of us kind of get into is the wrestling path here for Ankalaev. And is he's going to take him down, or that threat, or all these things. And, I went back, watched tape, looked over stats. And the one thing you got to look at is that I really do believe that the wrestling that Magomed has is way overrated. I just think it's way overrated here. And not only the fact that, I think he doesn't really wrestle. And when he does, he doesn't really find much success. He currently has a 22% takedown success rate. To put that into perspective, Mackenzie Dern has a 17% takedown success rate. So let's put that into perspective there. But also the fact that against Pereira, he was 0 for 12 on takedowns, and it forced him to cage push. He was unable to get the takedowns, was able to kind of hold him up against the fence, bank rounds in certain spots. Yes, he was winning some of the striking exchanges, not taking that part of it away, but you could maybe put that into the fact, injuries, all those other things. But when you're talking about the wrestling side of things, 0 and 12 on takedowns, you also got to look at the fact that even Jan Blachowicz, a couple of fights prior to that, Ankalaev was 2 for 10 on takedowns. And out of Ankalaev's 15 UFC fights, 15, he's only secured over 1 takedown twice. So out of 15 UFC fights, more than one takedown twice. One of them was against Jan Blachowicz. The other one was against Krylov, and he had 3 takedowns on Krylov, I think, on 10 attempts, and that was back in 2021. And let's put it in perspective here: Krylov is 5-7 in the UFC, so not the greatest when you're talking about that type of it. But also the fact that you've got to add in the vulnerability that Ankalaev has on leg kicks, and that's something, again, that's not debatable in my opinion here. The guy doesn't check them. He doesn't even attempt to check them. I mean, we saw again, Blachowicz was chopping the hell out of his legs, made that fight very close. And even you saw Pereira chopping away, but not able to mix it up. And that's something that I think that if he's able to add in those leg kicks, chop away a little bit, and then have the ability to open up the head shots, open up the big shots to the head, if he doesn't have a broken hand or so, I think that changes this fight. I think that absolutely changes this type of fight going into this thing where if he's not able to check those leg kicks, he's going to chop away. I think Pereira is going to be very aggressive. I think he's going to put out a much higher pace and look to really move forward and look to throw. And again, I don't think that the wrestling path is as prominent as I think maybe it's looked at, because of his last name and because of like who he is and all these things. So I don't really think that there's that part of it. I just don't think that. But the other part of it is the fact that, the strength of schedule. You look at the strength of schedule here, it's highly favoring Pereira. Out of his last 9 UFC fights, 8 of them are against former champions. I just think this is a spot where I think you're looking at this market, you're looking at this line movement. The line is getting wider at this point here. I think this is a way overreaction, and everyone's really forgetting who Pereira is. Yes, he's 38 years old. I understand that part of it, but in the higher weight classes, higher shelf life here. And I think Pereira bounces back here. I think he gets this victory. This is a spot where I think it's a dog or pass spot. I think this plus money, you're talking, 230, 240 on Pereira here. I think this is a no-brainer here. I like Pereira. I like the plus money, and I think he gets the job done and new in the main event. Next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Merab Dvalishvili. He is minus 380 on the comeback here. We've got Corey Sandhagen plus 300. Now, you've got Merab here, who is, probably the GOAT of the division here. I mean, the guy has beaten the who's who, beaten former champions. He's beaten Henry Cejudo, Peter Yan, Jose Aldo, O'Malley twice, and it's just really looked good. And the thing about it that we all know, his style is a nightmare, right? His style is an absolute nightmare for whoever he fights, any type of, style he gets, whether we're talking about strikers in O'Malley, we're talking about even an elite level grappler himself in Umar Magomedov. He's still able to just outpace them, out-wrestle them, and that's really the mix that he has. He's got the relentless pressure with, elite level cardio and elite level wrestling. And he just is able to put that together, weaponize that cardio, continue to push the pace, continue to come forward. And he's just been able to find a ton of success that way. Now, Corey does present, some issues here. And there's no doubt about it. Just the way that Corey fights, he can put out some issues here. And I think one being the fact that he can scramble. That's at times where, guys can be put on their back. They don't get up, who do have the good striking ability. And I think that you've got Corey who can scramble, can get back to his feet. He can be taken down. That's definitely something that we're going to see Merab get some takedowns. But also, I do think that he can work back to his feet. He can create the space, start to use his rangy striking again. Plus, you got to add in that Corey does have good cardio. He has proven cardio. He's been able to push through some of those things. And that's something where we've seen Merab melt guys. He's been able to just put that pace out, put that pressure out, and melt guys. And I think Corey can possibly withstand some of that. Plus, you got to add in that, Corey is going to be the better striker here. He's definitely going to have the more versatile striking arsenal between the two. He's definitely going to be better at range, better at distance, smoother combinations. And even in the clinch, we've seen him with really nice elbows, knees. We've even seen him where guys are looking for takedowns, jumping knees. I mean, a lot of things that he can do that he's going to be able to mix it up. Now, one of the things that I just recently saw is that Merab is saying 90% of this fight is going to play out striking, that he is going to strike with him. He's going to knock out Sandhagen. And that can change a little bit here when you're talking about capping this fight and talking about, hey, there's takedowns or all these things. Of course, it's what they say. We don't know. It's very tough to someone's talking about a strategy. It's kind of, not believable when they're saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do, and let's let the opponent know that. But with that being said, Merab is just far better. And when you're talking about a path here, and if he does go that path, the wrestling is going to be too much here. He is just a far better minute winner. You got Corey, who's going to need the moments. He's going to need the knockout. He's going to need the knockdowns. I don't think he just sits there and outpaces him for 5 rounds at distance without Merab looking for takedowns, looking for that control time overall. I think Merab can bank rounds, push him up against the fence, look for takedowns, weather some of these big shots, because yes, they're going to be coming. We've seen some of these highlight knockouts that Sandhagen has had. I do think that he's going to be able to get through some of those things. Merab has that durability, and he's going to be able to push forward, find opportunities. And where I'm going with this play is the fact that Merab is really not a finisher. Out of his 12 consecutive wins, only 2 are by finish. One of them was very recent, where fight that was actually at Madison Square Garden, Merab versus O'Malley 2. And, he went out there. O'Malley on the ground is an absolute slouch. He doesn't, nothing's improved when we're talking about O'Malley's ground game here. But Corey is a guy that's very tough to put away. Out of his 5 losses, he's only been finished 1 time. That was in 2020 against Aljo here. And I just think that he's going to be able to weather this storm. Also, there's going to be some close rounds, I think maybe early, but I think Merab really picks up the pace, banks some rounds, finds the victory. So yes, it's a little bit chalky here, but getting off the, the minus 400 number on Merab, I think Merab by points is the way to go here. Merab, it's minus 170. Again, a little chalky here. It is starting to increase at certain books here, but I think it's the side here. It's where I'm going here. So I'm going Merab by points in the co-main event. Next one here we're going to talk about is going to be Joe Pyfer. He is minus 260 on the comeback here. We have Abus Magomedov. He is plus 196. Now, Abus is on a 3-fight winning streak here, and he went out there. He's beat Worley Alves, Bruno Ferreira, and Michel Pereira. Now, over those 3 fights, it's nice to have a winning streak, but also those wins I thought were very underwhelming. And there was some, you're looking at those fights, I thought it kind of exposed some vulnerabilities more than looking like great performances from him. Now, the Worley Alves fight, this is a guy who was 1-5 out of his last 6, has not looked good. Looks like he's really just weathered at this particular point. Even there, Alves, he outstruck Alves 22-16 on significant strikes. It was the 6 takedowns and the control time that got him the victory, but I thought it was like kind of a little bit of a lay and pray, a little bit of a control, and wasn't really doing much damage. He did get the victory, but again, not that great of a performance. Against Bruno Ferreira, close fight. Bruno literally almost puts him away, but Bruno just overreacted, overcommitted, allowed Abus to kind of get back into the fight and find that submission. But again, we're seeing some durability issues. We're seeing some vulnerability issues on the Abus side. And then the Pereira fight, I thought was maybe one of the worst fights that we have seen, maybe next to, Francis Ngannou and Derek Lewis, but these guys didn't do anything. It looked like Pereira was pretty much throwing this fight. He didn't really look like he attempted really anything violent. It was just pitter-patter shots. I'm pretty sure that Pereira had a boost by decision because he was just willing to kind of like go through the motions, lose the fight. I thought it was a bad showing overall, but again, Pereira looks like another guy on the way out at this point here. Now, there are multiple red flags on the Abus side. And I think the first thing is going to be the wrestling path. And as I just said, he was able to get some takedowns on certain guys, even in bad situations where he was hurt. He was able to get a takedown, able to, get some control time there, work some submission game. He's not going to be able to do that against Pyfer. Pyfer's going to be the better wrestler between the two, the better grappler between the two. And I just think that, if he does get in danger, Abus is not going to be able to find these level changes and kind of weather the storm that way. I think that, if Joe lands something big, he's going to push forward. He's going to keep him on the feet, or he's going to find, control time on top and be able to ground and pound Abus. So I think there's a lot of issues there. Plus you've got, Pyfer is going to be the physically stronger fighter, I believe, between these two. So I think there are advantages. Again, if there are the takedowns, I think that Joe has no problem keeping this on the feet at all. Now, the other issue here is going to be Abus's terrible cardio. Now, I'm not saying that Pyfer has this high-level cardio, but, I do think outside of round 1, he has shown, even fights where it has not been that active in round 1, Abus is way slowed down outside of that first round here. And I just think he can't push any type of real pace. He can't push a wrestling pace because he can't fuel these repetitive takedowns, these repetitive opportunities here. He just can't do it. And I think that, again, he can't push out the volume. That's another part where he's just a very low volume striker. He doesn't really, do too much when he's on the feet. He's kind of positional. And I just think that this is a spot where, again, he's going to have no cardio. He's not going to have much cardio. And he's a guy that isn't going to be able to utilize the wrestling. And, he's a guy that does have some durability problems. And also you've got to add in that I just think that overall, Pyfer is a guy that is better in all areas here. He's going to be the better wrestler. He's going to be the better grappler. He's going to have the crisper, better combinations. He's going to have the power advantage here. He's going to have the faster hands, better durability. I mean, I think there's a lot that really goes into this that probably could make this line even wider. I do think this 3-fight win streak for Abus is keeping it somewhat. I think this should be much wider. And then when you're looking at Abus here, we just said, he's hittable, he's durable, he's not durable. He has a negative striking differential. He's a guy that's going to come forward. And I think that, we do have Pyfer who 7 wins in the UFC, 4 by knockout in the UFC. He probably could have been very close to one against Kelvin Gastelum, dropped Kelvin Gastelum in the most recent fight twice, wasn't able to get the finish, but Kelvin's like punching a brick wall. I think if anything slightly like the shots he was landing against Kelvin land on a boost, the fight is over. So for me in this spot here, to get off the minus 260 number, I do like Pyfer by KO is around plus 150. I like that number. I think he puts an absolute stamp on this fight. I think he puts a big time stamp on this fight here. And I think it can come early, but I do like Joe Pyfer by knockout plus 150. And the last one here we're going to talk about is going to be Daniel Santos. He is minus 145 in the comeback here. We've got Ju Sang Yu. He is plus 122. Now, Santos comes from the Muay Thai shoot to box gym. We all know how those guys fight. They're going to be aggressive. They're all fight the same way. They're going to be aggressive. They're going to come forward. They're going to throw volume. They're going to stay in your face. They're not really, they're going to care about defense as much. They're going to really crash the pocket, throw that volume, and really just believe in their ability to overwhelm you with the volume, look for the takedowns if they need it. And that can, that aggressive style can be overwhelming. But I think a lot of the things that Santos does well, I do think that Yu is able to kind of nullify or match in this fight. And I think on the feet here first, I think overall, I think Yu is a better striker. I really am impressed and like what I see from this kid here. Yes, he was able to, find an impressive knockout victory in his last fight, but I think just overall we've seen he's fast, he's has the better combinations. I do like the stance switching that he does have as well too. He goes from southpaw to orthodox very, very smoothly, disguises these combinations very well. He is going to have a 4-inch reach advantage as well too. So I do think some of these things mixed all together here is really going to be a lot of opportunities for a guy who's very hittable on the feet, because that's the other part of it too, that the biggest issue here for the Santos side is going to be he's extremely, extremely hittable. These guys are very offensive minded, not as defensive minded here. I do think that the negative striking differential for Santos is going to appear here. And you're about to face a guy who hits very hard. I think that take one to give one type of thing, and the lackluster, defense is going to really weigh on him here. I think that's where Yu's going to find a ton of success. And even in the pocket, we've seen that Santos can be very wild. He can be wild, reckless, not as technical. And I think that's where you're going to see Yu find success. And could there be wrestling here? I think that is the path here for Santos to find these takedowns, look for some control time, overwhelm him with just relentless takedowns. And it appears he may have that cardio. He looks like he has shot a lot, but I think cutting the distance here, I think Yu's going to make him pay big time. I think he's going to land some big time shots. I think he's going to struggle consistently finding these takedowns. I think Yu also is going to be the physically stronger guy between these two. I do like his fakes, his feints to mix it up a little bit here. So I do like Ju Sang Yu to get the job done at plus 122. So there you have it for my plays for UFC 320. If you want to become a client, link down in the description. Again, I have a max bet up right now. Have 2 plays. We'll be probably having 5 or 6 plays by fight night on Saturday. So again, if you want to become a client, link down below. And let's get the job done again. Let's cash this weekend. See you next week, and let's cash.